right, so welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We are looking forward to sharing some information with you about the current Cal TPA and ask you to help us think about this assessment and how it might work for or add to the work of special education. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So what you're seeing now is our agenda for the next 2 hours. We plan to be live with you this afternoon. So we'll start out by reviewing the meeting purpose and then move on to just a few norms so that we can all make sure that we all get as much as we can out of this time together. Then we'll talk about the SPED Cal TPA draft development timeline so that everyone has a sense of how we will move through this development period of time. And then take a look at an overview of the operational aspects of the current Cal TPA, the multiple subject, single subject, instructional cycles and rubrics. Then we'll have some group discussion. And at that time, Jake Schuler, who is with Professional Services, he will put us into different discussion groups and he'll explain to all of us how to do that when we get to that point in the presentation. And then we'll talk about next steps. So just quickly to introduce myself, my name is Amy Rising. I'm the Director of Performance Assessment Development for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and I'll turn it over to Terry to say hello.
Hi, I'm Terry Clark. I direct the Professional Services Division.
Wayne?
Yes, Wayne Baser, good afternoon. I've been overseeing the Cal TPA since 2007 and glad to be here and happy to help and assist anytime I can throughout the presentation.
Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Solari, also with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing.
William?
William Patrick, consultant here with the Professional Services Division at CTC.
Great. And then Jake, you want to just say hi real quick? He's helping us with technology.
Yeah, hi there. This is Jake Schuler. I'm also a consultant at the Commission.
Correct. Wonderful. So you have a whole team working with you today. We know we have several of you with us. We don't. We're hoping that you'll join us in the Google chat and things like that, and we'll get to know who you are as we move along through this presentation. So let's go to the next slide. There you go. All right, so we want to start by just talking a little bit about the purpose of why we're meeting with as many of the special education community as we can in the next several months. We want to be able to share the architecture of the TPA with interested faculty and teachers. So we have a long history with teaching performance assessment in California, and we want to share with you what we have to date and then get your input what we have and where you think we might go with this. We want to be able to support faculty and teachers in thinking about which aspects of the TPA would work well for education specialist candidates and which aspects would not. And we're specifically talking about the Cal TPA today. We would like to think broadly with you about what should be assessed on the special education TPA. And finally, we want to capture your thinking today and with other stakeholders across the state as we meet with them to inform the commissioners and the special education design team. So we will be convening a design team of educators that will work with us over the next 2 years and into the future, we hope, as we work on development and then have our pre-test and our field test and then finally our first year of administration. Next slide, please. So just quickly, we would like you to use the chat feature that hopefully all of you can find on your screen. And I think it's as simple as clicking on the chat button. It'll give you the opportunity to write in your question. And then staff who are joining me today on this presentation will try and answer your questions. And we'll pause periodically to try and interact with those questions and make sure you do get your answers. Please do make sure that your computer's microphone is on mute because that will help us be able to communicate clearly today. Do listen actively without interrupting. look ahead to positive action. We are going to, of course, appreciate all perspectives. And then if you would be able to make sure you stay focused with us and not engage in other technology, that would be great. Next slide. All right, so quickly, we wanted to give you a sense of the timeline here. So here we are in 2019 with 2020 fast coming up. And we are beginning this process, which has already been underway, frankly, for years. But now we're finally at this point where we're able to hold focus groups, and we will soon be putting out an application and appointing a design team to work with us. That design team work will begin in the winter, and our contractor evaluation systems group from Pearson will be our contractor on this work, and they'll be working with us throughout this process. As we move into the 2020-2021 year, we'll begin recruiting assessors. It's very important in these types of performance assessments to have assessors that hold the appropriate credential, and then we'll do a pilot test with candidates. We'll begin that study in the winter of 2021, and then we'll move on in later that spring once submissions from candidates have come in, and we will move forward with training assessors and conducting survey analysis of all who have engaged so that we have enough feedback so that we can improve the system as we come through the summer and get ready for the fall of 2021, winter 2022. We'll begin to conduct our field tests at that time, and again continue our recruitment of assessors. We'll train those assessors and score the field test results, and again conduct a survey of all involved to make sure we get feedback from not only the assessors but the faculty work engaged with candidates and the candidates themselves. And then provided all is going well, we will conduct a standard setting study using the field test score data at that point in May of 2022. When we get to June, based on the deliberations of that standard setting study, we'll bring a commission item forward to the commission at its June meeting and ask them to set a passing standard, an entry-level passing standard that we would then share with fields. We would make final revisions to the materials based on those field test findings that summer, and then in the fall of 22, we expect to have the beginning of our first operational administration. So you can see our timeline's moving pretty quickly, but we do hope to have an assessment up and running by 22-23. So now let's move on and talk a little bit about our operational aspects of the current model. All right, so we want to just talk about what we currently have in the Cal TPA, which is the commission's approved model for gen ed candidates. So in this model, we assess teaching performance expectations 1 through 6, known as universal TPEs, and the candidates use content-specific pedagogy in addition to the pedagogical TPEs to support the development of their submission. And the assessors use content-specific pedagogy during the scoring process to make sure that content is being instructed and assessed in an appropriate and supportive, asset-based driven way for students. Next slide, please. Other things we'd like to make sure that you're aware of, this is an online system, and so the registration process for candidates is all conducted online. There's an online candidate submission system with integrated annotation tools. So in the current Cal TPA, there are 2 cycles of instruction, and inside of those cycles, candidates produce narratives and videos. And when they do produce videos, they look at the videos and annotate them. Basically, we wanted to make sure that you understood all the capacity that this system currently has. So candidates can submit their submissions year-round. We have submission windows for the Cal TPA that are offered to candidates every month, and in some months twice a month. when candidates do submit and their submission is sent online through the system to a calibrated score, they score it and return those results within 3 weeks to the candidate, to the program, and to the commission. It is a centralized online scoring process, and electronic distribution of scores, as I said, is sent to programs, and then we have yet another tool available called Results Analyzer, and programs can then begin to manipulate their data and study it to understand the impact and the outcome measures that the Cal TPA provides on each of its rubrics. And then, of course, programs, candidates are enrolled in programs and participating in teacher preparation programs. These are the only candidates that can take the Cal TPA or any TPA for that matter. And programs then, if a candidate does not pass one of the cycles of the Cal TPA, they must offer remediation and retake support to the candidate. $150 per cycle. So there are 2 cycles, so the total cost is $300 per candidate. Candidates register and submit each cycle separately, so that this was purposeful and a very strong point by the design team that put the Cal TPA together, in that candidates could engage in a cycle, submit the cycle, get their scores back, and then get coaching and feedback, and hopefully work on improving their practice before they would need to pay for its cycle too. So they do register separately for each cycle so that it provides that flexibility. There is a rescore option for candidates, so if a candidate doesn't pass and they're concerned about their scores, they can, again, for a fee, have their submission rescored. And accommodations, of course, are made available for settings where video is prohibited, or if a candidate needs accommodations because they have a learning need that we need to accommodate for. Program supports that we have put together and developed through all of our interactions with the field over the last several years, and these seem to be working well. We would intend to continue these supports as we move forward with the SPED Cal TPA. So we have weekly office hours where staff from the commission and evaluation systems is live every week on Thursday mornings, so that if anyone has any program faculty or program coordinators have questions, we can make sure they get answered in a timely way. So every week we're live with office hours. We also offer monthly virtual think tanks, which are online opportunities for the community to come together and for faculty to share best practices, for mentors, coaches who work with beginning teachers to share best practices. We typically have a topic that think tank is about, and we offer them once a month, typically on the last Friday of the month. We also do webinars of the system periodically and make these available through archiving them, and that way if someone's not available during the time that we offer it, they can go back and take a look at the information that's been presented. We have a strong relationship with an organization called CUE. Their Computer Using Educators was what CUE originally stood for. And this is our community of educators out there who's working hard to make sure that ed tech is used appropriately to help extend knowledge of content and use, and to build digital citizens, etc. And they offer free membership to teachers so that they can have access to all of their resources as well. In addition, this links to ISTE standards, which are the national level standards used to guide ed tech. And then finally, on our website for Cal TPA, we have an area called Community Resources, where faculty, as they develop products and supports, can host them there and then share their best practices, again, and through a different venue for people to access. And if you go to that website, www.ctcexams.nesinc.com, you can see all of the resources and all the additional information about the Cal TPA. This is a picture of what that front landing page looks like. And if you come to this landing page into this website, and if you go into that section where it says select an assessment, you would select Cal TPA for now. In the future, you would you would probably select the special education Cal TPA if that's what you're interested in. You would follow that link and you would be able to see all of the resources that are already there. So what we have when you go into this are resources for faculty, resources for candidates, all of our policy statements, all of our assessment materials, all of our community resources that include video around how to take videos appropriately and how to annotate them, and a whole host of very useful information. We have some discussion questions that we'd like to engage with you around today, so we'll just go over these real quick. So we're wondering and are really looking forward to having your input around whether or not you think the existing Cal TPA can be adapted for the education specialist candidate. And does the current architecture that we're going to walk through, structure of the Cal TPA work for special ed? The second question we want to think about is what should be privileged or measured in the special ed TPA? For example, what don't you see in the current TPA that you believe the candidate should be assessed on? Is there something missing, in other words, that you don't see after today's discussion? And then finally, how might the instructional setting that the special ed candidates work in impact or change how these special ed candidates might complete the Cal TPA? So those are our three guiding questions. And we wanted to just sort of give you a way to think about this. So we provided a table. So we have our different credentials in the far left column: multiple subject and single subject, mild to moderate, extensive support needs, early childhood, deaf and hard of hearing, and visual impairment. And then in the middle column, you can see the TPEs that have been designed for each of these different types of credentials. So we have the universal TPEs 1 through 6 for multiple subject, single subject. And then you can see as that goes down to mild, moderate, it is the same, but with the addition of the mild, moderate, special needs TPEs 1 through 6. So extensive supports, again, are universal TPEs, and then along with those, the extensive support needs TPEs, and then early childhood has its own set of TPEs 1 through 6, deaf and hard of hearing 1 through 6, and BI TPEs 1 through 6. So the Cal TPA structure has 2 instructional cycles. Instructional cycle 1 is focused on learning about students and planning instruction. Instructional cycle 2 is focused on assessment-driven instruction. Each of these cycles has 4 steps. The first step is about planning. The second, the candidate teaches and assesses a group of students, a classroom of students. The third is the candidate reflecting on what happened in their planning process and their teaching and assessing. And then finally, the 4th step is apply, and this is about how they will apply what they've learned in this, moving through the first 3 steps as they think about the next instruction for this group of students that they're working with in this instructional cycle. So this brings us into instructional cycle 1, learning about students and planning instruction. So we're going to take a look here first together, and today we're only talking about cycle 1 with you, but we're going to start with step 1, which is about planning. And what you see in this evidence table is the kind of things that we're asking teachers to provide for us as part of their response to this assessment. So in step 1, the candidate is asked to tell us about who it is that they're teaching. So the first written narrative that they complete is called Getting to Know Your Students. And you can see here that candidates can only submit up to 9 pages. In addition, candidates using the California State Standards or frameworks develop a lesson plan, and that lesson plan is also submitted. Next, candidates then complete another narrative with prompts guiding them around their lesson plan rationale. And finally, candidates are also in this step asked to submit related instructional resources and materials that they're using during this one lesson with one group of students. So that is our first step, planning for cycle 1. So we're going to move on here and pause for a second and talk about focus students. So in instructional cycle 1, candidates are asked to identify 3 focus students and to really think carefully about how to provide asset-based instruction for these, not only for the whole class, but also for these particular focus students. So the first focus student is an English learner. The second focus student is a student who has district identified learning needs and they have an IEP, a 504 plan, or have been designated as GATE. And then the third focus student is a student whose life experiences either inside or outside of school may result in a need for additional academic or emotional support as they engage in the inclusive setting in this lesson. That brings us to step 2. In step 2, candidates are teaching and assessing while they teach the lesson they told us about in the first step plan. So in step 2, candidates then get up on, they teach the lesson. In this case, we're looking at the multiple subjects version of the guidebook. So it must be a literacy or mathematics lesson. Single subject, of course, would be doing each instructional cycle in their single subject content area. They video record the entire lesson that they teach, and then they go back and select 3 segments from that full lesson. The first is how they created a positive environment, classroom environment, and set expectations for learning. The second is how they engage students in activities and used instructional strategies. And the third video clip they select is to show us and to show assessors how they clarified next steps for learning. Inside of those 3 clips, and each clip is 5 minutes each, they then go in and annotate to show very specifically now where they see their practice and where they have created a positive learning environment. And then they write a brief rationale about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Then they have a brief timestamp where they select from that 5-minute clip, and they annotate it for how they set expectations for learning. They go on and show us where they're doing content-specific higher order thinking with students, and then finally where exactly they're monitoring for student understanding. So that's step 2, and the evidence for step 2 are these 3 annotated video clips, and each video clip may only be 5 minutes long. So that brings us to our third step, reflect. This is where candidates pause and think back about what happened in the planning phase of this cycle, what happened when they taught and assessed, and now they're responding to prompts around reflection. So there is a written narrative again for them, and they reflect on what they learned, and again, there's a page length requirement. And that brings us to our fourth step, apply, and this is where candidates think about how they're going to take what they have learned in their cycle and apply it forward in time to the next instruction they would offer to these students. In this step, candidates can choose to either write their response, so again, this would be 3 pages of text, or they can videotape themselves responding to the prompts. We wanted to be very careful not to have an overburden on writing. This is not a writing assessment, it's a performance assessment. And so the option of having video technology and being able to have an easy and straightforward way for candidates to record video and to upload that video has been really helpful this time as we revised the TPA that we originally had in place for many years. And so now we have this option that we can offer candidates to also have video in step 4. What you have in front of you now is a rubric, an assessment rubric. So what I wanted to pause here and point out, this is just one of the many rubrics of cycle 1. We have 8 rubrics in cycle 1, so this is rubric 1.6. and it's used to assess the teach and assess portion, or step 2 of the cycle. You can see that there is an essential question, and this essential question lays out what it is that the candidate and the assessor need to be really focused on when thinking about this, the evidence required. And so this question is, how does the candidate actively engage students in deeper learning of content and monitor or assess their understanding? So we start with level 1. There are 5 levels. Level 1 is the level where the candidate is not providing evidence around what the essential question is asking for, or there are inaccuracies in the presented content, or the next steps for learning are not provided at all. So really the level 1 response is a response where we just don't have very much evidence and we're not seeing what we've asked for. Level 2 moves up the scale, and now we're seeing candidate instruction and or assessment where students are engaged, but they're engaged in lower order thinking about content, and they're using strategies to engage students in passive learning of content as opposed to that higher order thinking or deeper learning that we hope to see. So the candidate is very directive in the instruction, and they're the ones doing all the talking while the students are much more passive, and then the next steps for learning are not clear. That moves us up to level 3, and this is the level at which we start assessors looking at, and this level is directly related to what the essential question asks for. So a level 3 response is going to be instruction and assessment where students are actively engaged in higher order thinking and deep learning, including analysis, synthesis, evaluation, interpretation, or transfer, and it's all related, of course, to content. And the candidate is able to monitor student learning and check for understanding throughout the lesson and provides next steps for learning. Excuse me. We get up to level 4, which is the next step, and notice at the top of that rubric level, the candidate must demonstrate and provide evidence of all of level 3 and also all of level 4 to be a level 4 response score. And here the candidate's instruction and assessment actively shows us where students have lots of opportunities to actively develop their own understanding, and of course this is linked to the learning goals set forth, and the candidate monitors student learning throughout the lesson, and we can see in the video that they are adjusting their instruction in response to the needs of the students during the lesson. Level 5 is our highest level on a rubric, and here note again that the candidate must provide evidence of all of level 3, all of level 4, and then all of level 5 to remain at the level 5 score. So this candidate's evidence shows us instruction and assessment that has promoted inclusion for all students in the classroom, and by providing all those opportunities to participate in classroom discourse and as members of the learning community in that classroom, students independently facilitate their own work, either in their in the whole class, small group, pairs, or individually, and students have choice about how to advance their learning. So this is very sophisticated teaching up here at level 5, but we have seen it across many submissions. So that is a bit of a walkthrough of our 5 levels. Now, at the bottom of our rubric, note that we tell you which TPEs and elements of those TPEs are being measured in this rubric, and then you see that there's content-specific pedagogy that the assessor is also aware of, and finally, what exactly the source of evidence is for this rubric. And in this case, 1.6, step 2, the assessor is looking at the 3 annotated video clips. So that's a walkthrough of the rubric. So this is just a quick review of the essential questions for cycle 1. So here you can see the 4 essential questions that guide those 5 level rubrics. So I'll just pause for a second and let you take a look at those four essential questions, all related to planning, which means the evidence is in that first phase of planning, and that's what the assessor will look at to make score judgments. I'll just pause for a second. So again, there are 4 essential questions for planning, 4 rubrics for planning. So the first rubric is the global rubric that looks at the candidate's proposed learning goals and how it's connected with prior knowledge and how they have defined specific outcomes for students, and then how those proposed activities and instructional activities and grouping strategies support, engage, and challenge all students to meet the learning goals set forth. The second rubric looks specifically at support for Focus Student 1, who is an English learner. The third rubric looks at support for Focus Student 2, who is a student with identified special needs. And the fourth rubric is about how the candidate supports Focus Student 3, that student that needs that extra support either in or outside of the class related to some kind of event that they've been part of either inside or outside of school. And it's a really focus on how we're creating a safe and positive learning environment for that student as they engage with the content. Again, all of this instruction is all about asset-based design and how do we take those assets that students bring into our classrooms and then provide the instruction and the supports that they need. In step 2, teach and assess, we have 2 rubrics. Rubric 1.5 and 1.6. 1.6 we just went over pretty thoroughly. And 1.5, the candidate needs to show their clear learning, how they have established clear learning expectations based on understanding prior knowledge and how they maintain that positive and safe learning environment to support all students to access and meet the content learning goals. And then 1.6 is the one that we looked at around deep learning of content. That brings us to step 3, reflect. We have 1 rubric there. Again, I'll pause just so you can take a second to read the essential question. Remember, in this step, they have already completed all of their planning work and they have taught and assessed that 1 lesson with the 1 group of students. And now they're reflecting on how they analyze and describe, citing evidence from their own work submitted in steps 1 and 2, the impact of their asset and needs-based lesson planning, teaching, and assessment on student learning, and explain how that lesson does in fact support the whole class and the 3 individual focus students. Our 4th step, apply, also has only 1 rubric. And again, I'll pause so you can take a minute to read 1.8. The essential question.
Amy, can I ask a question, because this is one I can't respond to in the chat?
Okay,
so
sure.
The question is, are we giving them a guide as to what is considered inclusion for level 5? Do we mean they are developing skills that are needed for inclusion in communities, or are you looking for actual inclusion opportunities reflected?
That is, off the top of my head, what we're looking for, if we can go backwards a slide, I guess, and look at that again, we could, I don't have that rubric particularly in front of me, but the notion is that students need to be in a learning environment. All the students in the room, plus the 3 focus students, need to be in a learning environment in which all students can access the core content. And therefore, it is inclusive in the sense that students get the support that they need in the gen ed setting to access the core content and to be able to engage in a meaningful way with that content in a deep way and access and engage with other students and be part of that learning community. So that's how we think about it. And we have explicit examples around that. And we can talk about this more, but I'm pretty sure we define inclusion. And of course, we can always continue to think about how we're looking at this, but that would be my response at this time. All right, so back to level 4. I think we took a look at this, but again, the essential question in 1.8 for step 4, apply rubric 1.8, looks at how candidates have applied what they've learned in this cycle and how they are going to strengthen and extend students' understanding of content and develop academic language and determine next steps for instruction. And that's what rubric 1.8 focuses